Hello and welcome, everybody. It is so good to be back on the show. And this is one of the best things I do in my life, honestly, is do this podcast recording. And it's the sort of thing, honestly, if I'm honest with you, in which it always just feels like, oh man, here we go. We're going to go and record another show. And it just kind of, I got to get ready for it. But then I meet with another member within our Catholic Financial Planners Network, and we start talking about the subject matter, and we get a chance to connect. And it's always just really deeply reassuring to me, because we just have really good members, and we have good topics. And the one topic that we're going to be discussing today is this notion of bringing the Lord and really our faith into the center of our lives. So like bringing them into the center of our daily life, bringing them into the center of our lives more generally, but also how do we bring the Lord into the center of our financial lives? And it's easy for us in the busyness of our day-to-day to push out what's most important and to, ignore things or neglect them or always hope to get to something, someday. And so at some point, there's always this question or the need, I think, to respond and be present and available to the Lord and his calling to us. And the best way to do that is just like, let's just put him first and foremost at the center of our life. And then we'll know that, we're not pushing him off on the side. And so we have on our show today, Daniel Campos. Daniel, did I say that right? Campos, yeah. Right? Or Campos? No, did I get?
I get them both. You did it perfectly.
Well, we'll have, we'll work through this. Daniel Campos is on our show today, and he's a member with the Catholic Financial Planners Network, and we're wanting to talk about how he has practiced in his own life, placing the Lord at the center of his life, especially with this notion of vocation, where we each of us has a calling, whether it's to marriage, to religious life, to perhaps the priesthood or the permanent diaconate. How can we respond to the Lord specific to our work as a vocation, and placing him and seeing the work of our daily fruit or our daily labors as the work of our vocation playing itself out. So Daniel, it's really good to have you on the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Happy to be here as well.
One of the things as we were chatting ahead of the call was just, you're in this time of life in which we're seeing a lot of, ordinary, priestly ordinations and, maybe folks becoming married. And it's like really striking you were sharing with just this calling of vocation. Like, do you mind just sharing with the audience, like, your maybe own experience of vocation, but like just how this is maybe, I don't know, speaking a message to your own heart?
Yeah. I mean, June here in D.C., as it is across the country, is ordination season. You start getting the invites or have invites to weddings and just seeing them everywhere. And also, it's month of the Sacred Heart. So there's just so many little things that are kind of swirling around this month. And for my own vocation story of going from being a young person to just a few years ago before I was married, thinking that, I was called to the priesthood and really discerning that out very strongly. As I, even joke, and we can get into that later of, with my spiritual director, he said, you were like the seminarian without the schooling and you were on a permanent pastoral year, essentially.
Is that right?
But I think of what you were alluding to, of just how can we be attentive in everything we do and bringing God to the center of all that, so that, you're open, you'll say yes to wherever you're meant to be, and he will collect in full when you freely say yes as well. So.
Yeah, one of the most beautiful things we have within our Catholic faith, actually, I think, is this call to the priesthood. It is also manifested for sure in the religious life, but this notion of consecration, and that for someone giving themselves completely over to God, to the point in which they don't take anyone else in marriage or in intimacy, in relationship, so that they can have their primary point of relationship or intimacy with the Lord. And there is really, like, just every time that you see this through, ordination, or maybe it's a religious profession of vows, it just swells your heart of like someone willingness to step forward and say yes, and to make this commitment upon themselves. And, the commitment isn't easy, and it's not without its challenges and without its struggles. I mean, just really true for all the rest of us. But yet it's such a demonstration, like a clear path of someone saying yes. And like, I think we just need in our lives sometimes people to go before us to show that what can be done because they're doing it. And it gives us that confidence that, look, if someone else can place the Lord at the center of their lives, like the full center of their lives, where they've like almost, denied all these other things to say yes. Like, well, I can do that too. Like, I can find a way to place the Lord, at the center. And so, Daniel, one of the things that really just struck me as we were chatting ahead of the conversation was just like in your own advisory practice, as you work with clients, you're the business owner, and so you get to decide kind of how your daily schedule is, and so it's up to you to decide whether or not the Lord is going to be at the center of your life. And so, I think as we're thinking of well, what are just some ways in which we can manifest this? What kind of guidance or direction? What have you done in your own situation?
I think you have to be extremely intentional and maybe even a little greedy sometimes with your time as you build those routines. I mean, for me, daily mass is generally a mandatory part of my day. I mean, I feel kind of like something's missing if I don't go. Can't guarantee it'll be a great day, but something is absolutely missing if I don't. So most mornings I'm up early to get to the 6:30 or 7 o'clock mass, and if I can't make it early, I'll go midday. But it's something that, for me, it's an essential part of my day. It helps me be centered and just be a better advisor and hopefully a better person. But also just making time for some quiet prayer. We have a lot of great prayers. We have the Liturgy of the Hours and Rosary and everything else. But, just to take 5 minutes on your couch or take a walk and, you can't always do that. We're imperfect. But I think building those types of routines helps me, and I would encourage other advisors to make sure you're doing that.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a culture that, is successful and has done well financially, and it's certainly an opportunity, a place for opportunity and to see success and growth in your finances. But, it has a heavy focus, I think, on work and prioritizing work, or even glorifying it and saying that's the most important thing that you accomplish or do in your life. And the truth is it's not really fully in keeping with our Catholic faith or belief. And a more permeated Catholic culture would be one in which the center of the day is the church, and these routines or practices or rituals. I mean, much like you're suggesting with going to daily mass. And so it isn't maybe so much the financial market bell, let's say, with the New York Stock Exchange, as it is the church bell that's is the noticeable difference with I think our present culture, which does have more Protestant influence for sure, versus a Catholic culture. And so for us who want to be more intentionally, we do want to live out our Catholic faith. Part of that is then we have to kind of be more intentional in separating ourselves out from the current practices and norms of the day, which instead of waking up first thing to get to work and see what we can get done and accomplished, what I love about what you're doing, Daniel, is this pivoting to say, well, why don't I start my day off with Mass and the liturgy and the Eucharist, and let God speak a word to me, right, and set that as the tone for my day. And so could you just share, especially with this notion of placing faith in the Lord at the center of our lives? I mean, you were sharing a moment ago that you feel that if you don't do that either your day's just off, or there's something's missing, or you're incomplete. Is that right?
Indeed. I mean, when we're so lucky as Catholics to have the Eucharist. I mean, without the Eucharist, what's the point? And that's what sets us apart from so many other Christian denominations. Is we've got the Eucharist. So I think that's the essential pull. I mean, if it was just to, hear a sermon or something, why would you bend over backwards in your day to make time to go to Mass, but really to receive God? I mean, there's nothing better than that. And I think that's what makes you feel off. It's a healthy addiction. There's so many bad addictions out there. Going to daily Mass is a great addiction.
Yeah, Yeah, I'm sorry. It facilitates this intimacy, but why don't you continue with your thought, Daniel?
No, I just it's you we're imperfect people. But when you have that intimate encounter with God on a daily basis, I think it helps you to try to improve on that imperfection. I mean, hopefully we get there one day, but it's I always say since I started daily mass, I like to think that I'm not what I am when I started. I'm not what I used to be. Not quite where I want to be, but it's a continual improvement.
Yes, I mean, we're imperfect people. Our days are imperfect. Maybe the challenges that come in our workday and things that blow up, we can take and we turn a mountain out of a molehill, right? We lose perspective, and there's just something with the century of bringing yourself before God on a daily basis that helps to just maintain of like, well, one, maybe I'm ready for whatever challenges have come this day because I have started off with God first in my life this day, but it's also like, you're just more prone, I suppose, to see things in the light of eternity, right? And not so much in what am I trying to accomplish for myself or for my family, as good as those things are. But it's like, well, how much does any of this matter once we start to pull ourselves back from it a little bit, right?
Exactly. I mean, I think it's so easy in our fast-moving culture to just be reactive and blow your top when something doesn't happen. And I think when you have those centered prayerful routines, it really helps you to go, well, that's not that big of a deal. Or, not reacting in the worst way actually will allow you to be better and respond to that better. So it definitely offers a lot of peace.
Yeah, and so I think that's just a beautiful thing too, is in your work as an advisor to set the day off in that way. That then as you're working with clients and you have those challenges, I would imagine that there's more naturally this spacing where I can take a step back from whatever might be happening and not just get caught up in the hurriedness of it all and be like, well, let's give this a little bit of time. Like, we need to put out this fire or address whatever it is that needs attention for that day. And I need to be present to it, but I don't have to get caught up. Maybe if a client or other, I don't know, the markets are going a little crazy, we don't have to get caught up with some of this insanity. And, for what that's worth, that's really good actually as a financial advisor, because we want to maintain and keep perspective on the long term, in financial matters too. So, eternity is very much the long term, but even just, a decade's perspective in financial matters is still helpful as the work of an advisor. And so, Daniel, I was, we haven't chatted much about your practice, but if, where do you, what's the name of your firm, and, what kind of region do you serve within?
Yeah. So my firm's called Campos Financial Group. I guess I started this in 2019 after coming into the industry in the wirehouses. I guess it's been about 13, 14 years since I came into the industry, and then half that time having my own firm. I'm based in Maryland, just about 10 miles or so north of D.C., so I have a lot of DMV clients, but also I think I'm licensed in about 16, 17 states across the country, so I'm not in any way against serving people all over the place, which is actually kind of fun to, meet with someone here who's locally, and then you have a call in the afternoon who's just kind of waking up and getting their day started in California. So it's a lot of fun.
Right, having those differences in time zones for sure. And so, I mean, what's wonderful about Daniel is that, I mean, if you're working with him, you've got this ongoing daily mass communicant and perspective that comes, at the start of his day that, sheds light on what he does, and we're participating really in the fullness of the liturgical calendar. And I think this is one of the things that's really just so distinct and beautiful about Catholicism, is just how on a daily basis so much of what we are celebrating or participating in, I don't want to say it's been decided for us in advance, but I suppose in a way it has been, right? I mean, there's an intentionality as to what we're doing on a daily to a weekly to, seasonal basis, and like the church kind of redirecting our attention or focus to, hey, this is what you should be thinking about at this time of the year. And, it does happen to be that I think, some of the focuses correlate or connect with the actual physical seasons, but like moving ourselves spiritually into these different phases. And I would say maybe giving ourselves a broader, fuller expression of our own humanity. It's just one of the beautiful things that just takes place within Catholicism, that like if you're immersed in this daily practice, you'll see this extent, this scope, whether it's within the scriptures or the saints of the day or the feast, we tend to cover it all. And so maybe back to your point earlier, Daniel, I mean, you were speaking about, June is the month of the Sacred Heart. We just wrapped up with the Easter season, had the Feast of the Holy Trinity, Corpus Christi. Now we're focusing on the Sacred Heart. How have you found, I think, the liturgical calendar and the variations of the Church's practice to really just, I don't know, speak more fully to your life?
I actually like the structure, and I've started to do something that I don't think as many Catholics do, of like really celebrating feast days and solemnities. Like we had the Sacred Heart. I went out and had a nice breakfast with my wife before I came into the office. The night before we made a holy hour. We got up for Mass together and had like a solemnity breakfast. And that's something I'll do. I'll, go to Mass, go get a nice coffee and treat. And my wife will be like, "What's this for?" "It's a solemnity. We're celebrating." That we wouldn't necessarily do on a normal day. So I take advantage of the church structure there. But it's also drawing attention to what that day is about. And then the seasons of, Advent and Lent, you're fine-tuning yourself. You're preparing for Easter, preparing for Christmas, but also those are times that I'm kind of also fine-tuning what I do and doing reviews and sharpening my skills as an advisor and making sure that I'm serving every client the way they need to be served. So I kind of match it up with whatever, you're doing self-work, preparation spiritually, but also in your daily work,
Yeah, and I think what's beautiful about this is that as you participate in this daily rhythm and activity and the seasonality, I mean, one is that it isn't always the same. It has its consistency. Like there are parts of it that stay true to form. Like you're going to daily Mass or you're praying the Rosary or having a quiet holy hour. But then you're also like experiencing like this variation just because the Church has this variation throughout its calendar. And so even though it's the same, it isn't the same. Like it has, we need, I think, maybe as humans, we get bored if all we have is the exact same every day, and it just tires on us. And so what's so beautiful within the Church's calendar is we can commit to the same practices, but then not limit ourselves to basically the same thing. We get, again, direction to highlight aspects and to allow that to be a moment of celebration and specialness, not really all that different from maybe your anniversary, your birthday, but, we have those more or less expressed in the liturgical calendar. And like through that, this would be my point, is that through this participation, I think we can start to hear the Lord speak to us and call us out and to move us. And this really speaks to this notion of a vocation, which from the Latin really is this notion of calling, which we all have. And so, I know that this has been something that's near and dear to you, this notion of vocation, Daniel, but just hearing the Lord's voice and responding to them. How have you seen maybe the Lord speak to you through these daily practices and the centering of Him in your life?
I think just seeing the maturity, the spiritual maturity, when you actually clear the noise out, you could be in the middle of a nightclub, and if you know how to focus and actually just listen, you can drown everything out. And there's nothing more enjoyable than that. You can be in a quiet space, just get up early and watch the, sunrise, or you can be somewhere that's, a crowded subway or whatever, and have that quiet moment of, of peace. I mean, I've seen it in many different ways, both in my work, my work ethic, my prayer life, my home life, everything. The more it's centered that you get, the more drawn in you get, the better everything gets, frankly.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's very much the case that for each of us, like the Lord has a plan for our life and what He's hoping us to accomplish. And, we can't really execute or fulfill that plan unless we give opportunity and space for Him to call us to it and to make it known or aware to us. But then, and this, very much ties, I think, into financial matters. There's always a risk in that calling. And maybe we're being asked to do something that would be uncomfortable or we're unsure about, or it's at least concerning. And, you have this, beautiful portrait behind you, Daniel, in which it's the calling of the fishermen and not, it's Jesus asking, the apostles as they go to fish to basically lower their nets onto one side of the boat versus another, or perhaps him walking out on the water, like all these risky endeavors. It just seems like, Lord, what are you doing? Maybe you're asking too much of me. Like what I'm wanting to connect is like, usually when the Lord speaks to us, he asks us to do more than what we feel comfortable doing. And so, how have you maybe either seen this manifested or reflected, or at least maybe in this daily routine, had yourself prepared to say yes when he calls?
I think when you get off of the routine, that's where you get in trouble. I mean, I think of my own personal trying to discern what I was supposed to do, where I was supposed to be. If I go back in time to when I first started discerning, whether to go to seminary or what, I had a very strong, very structured prayer life of, daily mass, did most of the hours each day, holy hours every other day, all the time. And when you fall from that, everything else kind of falls by the wayside too. I mean, I'm not saying that I was a perfect Catholic for much of this period, because I wasn't. I definitely went off the path, kind of like think of a yo-yo of like, you always come back up. And I know many people, they go down, the string snips and you never come back up. And, no matter what I did, I always got led back to the center. I never got too far off, but, if you took a graph and you plotted it out, I was still pretty far away at times.
Sure.
And that calling of service of, where I thought it was headed was seminary. Was really strong from like high school through college. Kind of went away, not quite, never. There were a lot of signs that I was kind of choosing to ignore, I guess. And ultimately, once I regained that structure, that traction, things, kind of fell more into place. It wasn't like, okay, maybe you are getting an invitation to go one direction, but you took too long or whatever. That's one of those hopeful discussions you have with God one day of like, so what was really the, I don't know. But ultimately when I met my wife and I got married and, okay, you see those just as many signs that I saw that were pointing me towards seminary and everything. The wind shifted and I got married, and you just get so many signs and you listen and you go, okay, this is where you're supposed to be now. That I gave you maybe I gave you 2 invitations and you were free to choose whichever way you wanted. And you chose the one. I had the one in store for you where I think will be the best, maybe not easy, but the easiest route towards holiness. And that's what I'm hopeful for. Because I've definitely seen that in my short, almost 4-year marriage. And so I think it's just really being attentive at all times and sticking with that routine.
Yeah. And so, I mean, the Lord calls us and we are hopefully responding, but then, I mean, I think there's this belief that, He'll supply to us the graces that we need, right, to support us in the journey. And so maybe as terrifying as it is to either throw the nets on one side of the boat versus the other, or to walk even out onto water as Peter had done in the scriptures, like, the Lord can do all things, right? And so we just have to be able to respond to this place of faith and listen, and then be willingness to give him a shot or a try, and only to trust him. And we can do this. I mean, we don't have to demonstrate this, in a very prominent way, perhaps as a priestly vocation or religious vocation might demonstrate it. Like, that's a very special call, an important one. One might even say a privileged one, and one that's impactful. But our work in the lay side of the church as married men and women, or those called to single life, or even consecrated virginity, it's still very much prominent in the world. We have equal opportunity to demonstrate, the goodness of God in our daily labors, and in our work, and in even fulfilling of our own commitments. And so, there is like a variation. We're in priestly life, financial matters don't tend to be such a priority because in a lot of ways things are handled or managed through the diocese and perhaps the parishes. And so, the focus there isn't per se on their own personal financial management. We have on the other side, on the lay side, this consistent call of what to do with our money and our resources, and how can we, what is the Lord asking of us in this matter? And perhaps that comes through the form of our career or our job. Maybe it comes through the form of a ministry. Maybe it comes through the form of charitable giving. I'm kind of curious, Daniel, in your experience, like, how have you seen maybe the call of the Lord and opportunities, a person's response to that, manifested in financial matters? Like, how have you seen this displayed?
I would say in two ways. One, and just seeing how people choose to lead and serve their own families when there's, a triggering event, or just to be so generous in sharing with their different communities and charities, and just to be so inclined to help. I mean, everyone's coming from different places. Not everyone that I'm dealing with is Catholic or even Christian for that matter, but there's such almost a common generosity that I'm lucky to experience, which I feel very lucky to see that. And then personally, I think I would say the quiet leadership, being that quiet advocate for my clients who are going through transition points. I mean, just last week I was sitting in the kitchen of a widow, and I used to meet with both the husband and wife, and he passed away. The husband passed away, and as well organized as we thought everything was, it wasn't. And you just to have that privilege to actually, it's a sad time, obviously, because she lost someone, but also to be there sitting with her, trying to help her have some peace, at least from this financial side of things. Everything's going to be okay. And really being that guardrail of, you need this, let's do this, or don't let that keep you up at night, whatever it is. I think that quiet service of, nothing's overt. We're not discussing anything spiritual, but it's just a quiet feeling of being privileged to be with people as they welcome new children, or they get married, or unfortunately, a spouse passes away, or even parents pass away, and the transitions that go through, it's just a different kind of privilege, because you are often doing, at least in my experience, I'm sure most advisors have this, I'm sure you have this, of when you're speaking with clients during these transition points, it's so much more than just that financial checkbox. That they're, in some cases, review meetings, whether it's just a regular review or this or that, there's very little time that's sometimes spent on business, and it's so much more of the humanity of what's going on in their life, and being like an extra ear.
Well, Daniel, I think that's just like a perfect plug, actually, for the Catholic Financial Planners Network, because a lot of the work that we do as advisors is certainly financially mattered, and it's technical, and people want good guidance and direction on, am I making the best use of my money? But and the work that I've had as an advisor, it very much sounds like the work that you've had as an advisor. And I think of the work that I've seen in other advisors having is that there's this deeply human connection that we have with our clients. And, part of working with somebody isn't just telling them what to do with their money. It's it's almost like telling them what to do with their lives and helping give clarity or peace of mind or connection that they're doing the right things in their life. They're going to be okay. I think we all get scared in some ways when it comes to money, and we're worried about it. And so like having this rootedness, like groundedness, this anchoredness in faith and this broader perspective, and having ultimately God, our Lord, at the center of our lives helps us to be more present, I think, in that human connection, which for clients, or potential, for our audience, for folks who are listening, you may not expect that to be like a takeaway or part of the conversation with working with a financial advisor. But in my work, I'm actually kind of surprised how often my clients will almost allude to thank you for this, financial therapy. Like it's not even like they didn't even think that that's what they were receiving when they started working with me, but that's how they feel about it when they have maybe a conversation. It's just like, oh, okay, everything's going to be okay. And so, we have, thankfully, this wonderful network of Catholic financial planners with the Catholic Financial Planners Network. And so if you're looking to work with somebody to help anchor you, to ground you, to maintain perspective, I just encourage you to reach out to, the advisors we have listed on that network. And so, Daniel, to your point, it's like connecting with people in their humanity. Like in some ways, like our calling is what I'm hearing from you, that the Lord is placing and giving to us in our daily labors, and how he can continue to speak to you on the daily place, and maybe even just how we manifest and put God at the center of our lives is in our particular work to continue to keep our clients in their humanity at the center of the engagement, and not to get distracted or pulled away, to not just reduce this to nuts and bolts, or not just to reduce this to numbers. And so I'd like to kind of just offer to you this notion of our fiduciary duty, because I know that's something that's been near and dear to your own heart and that you were wanting to center or chat about. How does our fiduciary duty kind of get reflected in our work, Daniel?
I think you have to look at it from 2 points of view. There's the very legal black and white fiduciary duty, and to some extent that could be I'd call it the bare minimum. I think of being rooted with a good, solid moral compass, particularly from the Catholic perspective. It kind of goes quite a step beyond that, because you are really doing, as you make decisions or recommendations for people, you're doing it with a different viewpoint in mind. It's not just, is this the right words to make compliance happy, or, the truly bare minimum things, but truly I'm making something in best interest, because if I were to pass away and I'm sitting on the judgment seat, I don't want that to come up that, oh, I saw the decisions you made. Did you really make that decision in the best interest? Did you, I don't want that on my conscience. And I know, not to cast judgment on people, but I know in our industry, we've all probably seen folks who, recommend something so they get a higher commission, or whatever it is. I just don't want that on my conscience. And number two, as independent advisors, where we have our name on the letterhead, essentially, you don't want, your name is everything in the secular world. If you lose your trust, you have a bad name, you lose your business. But much more than that, it's just a moral, spiritual fiduciary standard that I like to follow.
Right. So, I mean, the issue or the challenge that we have with this notion of fiduciary is like, are we really doing what's in the best interest of our client? And I suppose one way to kind of hold anybody accountable, hold our feet to the fire, as they say, is, well, what would God have to say about that? Would the Lord agree with your determination? Would that have been the advice the Lord would have given to somebody? Like, are we in good standing with him, with what we're suggesting? And, that certainly has like a strong religious overtone to it, but and we don't, in our practice in this industry, like it doesn't get raised up in that sort of way. But perhaps specifically as Catholics, maybe that's the way we should be adhering to the fiduciary duty, is like, what would Jesus, what would God our Father have to say about the work we're doing?
I'd even take that a step farther. I mean, I usually say, if you were my mom or dad or uncle or grandfather, this is what I would do. But take it a step farther. If Joe Client is your grandfather, if Jesus was your grandfather, would you make this recommendation? You make it even more human.
Yeah. Personal. Like, I mean, none of us have a tendency, hopefully not, to betray our own mom or betray a family member. And so if
Right.
would you do this to a family member? And if we wouldn't do it to a family member, then we certainly shouldn't.
Exactly.
Shouldn't do it for a client. And there are challenges. I mean, we're all trying to make ends meet and try to make a good life for ourselves, and to and to have a good business. And so we want to do right for our clients, but then we also want to do right for ourselves. So, but then at the end of the day, like, a fiduciary duty is like a willingness to have something come at a cost to us that ultimately is at a benefit to our clients, and a willingness for us to maybe not do as well, just so that our clients can do better. And I mean, taken to extremes, that that could potentially put an advisor in destitution, which I don't think is the intent of the fiduciary duty, but it does kind of highlight like a willingness on our part to not be the ones who win in these relationships, or to make sure that if we are winning, it's because our clients are winning and others are winning as well. We can't just be us coming out ahead, right?
Yeah, that we're truly on the same side of the table as our client, that we're not trying to take more. We're trying to do well for them. And if we do well in the process, that's okay, but not in a disadvantageous way to our client. We never want to be like that. And
right.
Unfortunately, you see it in our industry. So I think it's just so important to be ahead of that and have that personal moral compass, so that you could look at yourself in the mirror.
Right. And be ready, for that final day, and feel confident. The truth is like, as much as that's important in the advisor and client relationship, as much as it's important in our role, and maybe as important for an advisor to be centered in the things that we've been discussing today, just so that perhaps, like, in a real practical way, what is a client receiving from us who's centered in the Lord, is that hopefully they're seeing the best demonstration of a fiduciary commitment, that's presumably the most trustworthy of advisors when it comes to your financial matters. It's also like, as we just kind of think about, like, all of us being called, the audience included, by the Lord into our work. The truth is I think we all have like a fiduciary commitment to just the work that we're doing, no matter what. Like, all of us are called to stand before the Lord one day and give an accounting, of our life, and to be judged, right? That's fundamentally one of these things that we believe. And so, this fiduciary duty certainly applies to us regulatory wise. We have that obligation. But perhaps just to bring it back to the audience too, in what ways are maybe you being called or asked to have, commitments in your own line of work, in your own career, and maybe to our other conversation pieces, like, maybe what is the Lord speaking or asking of you? Have you heard His voice? Are you feeling His nudgings and His movements to do something? And who are you maybe meeting or working with to kind of feel or work through those nudgings to confirm that they're the Lord's call, and maybe not something else. So I'd like to kind of, Daniel, as we start to think of wrapping things up and just giving closure to this notion of responding and knowing the Lord and His voice, like, how, what kind of passing wisdom or guidance would you give to everybody on knowing the Lord's will for you?
I think it's what we first talked about is having that routine of how you pray and how you communicate with God, and make sure that you have time to just be quiet and close your thoughts down. Because how many times are we, somewhere, and it's like, well, what about this? What about this? What about that? You just have to be quiet and listen. And, maybe you have little nudges. Some are stronger than others. But just be very attentive in everything you do. Because that's definitely working for me. And to have good spiritual direction, that you can also go and, kick it back and make sure that, like you said, it is coming from a good place and not some other agenda, which is easy to do. Because I think that's important too, to make sure you have good spiritual, good spiritual direction and kickbacks to make sure that what you're saying and what you're hearing is from a good place.
Yeah, I mean, this importance of having mentorship in this role, and I mean that is most prominently expressed in the work of spiritual directors that we thankfully have. Folks who have a vocation in their own right to be a spiritual director, and many times that is correlates with the priest or religious folks who perhaps are more attuned or more present or have their whole life is committed to such activities. But there are plenty of lay people too who can work in this place of spiritual direction. And I would say to some extent, the work of a financial advisor can speak to this as well for folks, especially if you're maybe having movements of large charitable giving, which are certainly good things, and we're in favor of them. I'm certainly in favor of them. I'm sure, Daniel, you are too. But we also want to make sure that this is coming from the Lord, and that we're not being misguided in those promptings, because in any of these sort of things we could either maybe bring financial harm to ourselves, or maybe we're just misunderstanding. And so to some extent, at least as far as financial matters go, this is kind of like a new interpretation that I've never considered. But to think of your financial advisor as your spiritual director for financial matters, perhaps, would be a beautiful role for any financial advisor to fulfill, right?
I've felt that. I mean, because sometimes people, that you have to use wisdoms, and it's wonderful that there are urges to be so generous, and I wouldn't want to get in the way of it, but you have to use wisdom sometimes, or just do it in an efficient way if you're gonna do that. And I think it's nice to have that advisor who is attuned to that and can help guide you to still be generous, but do it smartly.
I love that. This is like a whole new theme for me, and we'll wrap up with this. Is this notion of a spiritual director for financial matters is the work of financial advisors. Well, folks, and for Daniel, if folks wanted to reach out and connect with you and learn more, or perhaps they want to have a spiritual director for the financial matters, what's the best way for someone to connect with you?
You can find me on my website. It's camposfinancialgroup.com. There's a contact page, or always email me directly, Daniel@camposfinancialgroup.com, or give me a call. That number's also on the website.
Awesome. Well, Daniel, thanks so much for being on the show today and sharing some of your own story and your commitments and your wisdom, your goodness. It's really been just wonderful to have another advisor, share with us how they've placed the Lord at the center of their lives, and how you're living that out very much through your daily labors, especially with your commitment for daily mass. So, just thanks for being that beautiful example. And folks, please do reach out to Daniel if you've been moved to connect with someone who can help you in this way.
Thanks, Ben. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. To everyone, God's blessings to you. We look forward to connecting with you in the next show. Bye now.